All right, welcome everybody. So I'm very honored to introduce this wonderful alum of Evergreen, Dante Garcia. And Dante is an artist, a designer, and a strategist who explores social and interpersonal transformation. In 2015, he co-founded the worker cooperative Story 2 Designs, which provided communications and design support for grassroots and progressive organizations across the country. He's worked on a variety of past projects, including the Wildlife Project, Resource Regeneration, Climate Justice Alliance, Got Green, Generative Somatics, Resource Media, Mihente, and more. Today, he is a trainer practitioner with the Center for Story-Based Strategy and is in the midst of launching Community Gearbox, a startup aimed at disrupting individual consumption, and he lives between Seattle and San Francisco. So Dante, thank you so much for joining us today. And I am going to go ahead and mute myself and hand it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Damson, for the little introduction. It's really good to be hanging out with folks. Part of me really wishes also that it could be in person. I was an Evergreen student from 2011 to 2014, which is essentially a decade ago, which kind of blows my mind a little bit because it doesn't feel like that long ago myself. And also, I just haven't been back. And I'm curious because I know everything is always changing around Evergreen. But yeah, nonetheless, really happy to be here with you all. I've got a set of slides that I'll be sharing. I may as well start sharing them now. Part of my presentation today is definitely acknowledging student activities. So shout out to the student activities folks. Yeah, let's see. I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen just to kind of ease us into this. I will also be doing a little activity before I really start talking for an hour. Seems like a lot. So I want to get a little voice in the other voices in the room, but I'll at least share my screen because I'm a sucker for quotes. Very cool. Can people see this? All right. I'm a sucker for quotes, so I got to throw something up there. Let's see, what else do I want to say? Yeah, I'm calling in today from San Francisco, Ohlone territory. Let's see. I think you already covered most of my little like self-introduction kind of stuff. I will say that the Center for Entrepreneurship, Entrepreneurial Leadership, and Transformational Change didn't exist when I was a student there. So I did not, and I know there are other business courses, but I actually very much was a political economy kid. And my journey towards entrepreneurship kind of had a winding road. So it's really cool to kind of see what this program is up and doing and stuff like that. And hopefully I'll be hanging out and listening to other speakers in the weeks to come. So nonetheless, let's get to it. So yeah, here's my, trying to be academic-y kind of title, Exploring Trust in Infrastructure for a Post-Capitalist World. What the heck is this? We'll definitely be getting into it. And I'm actually going to stop my share because I want to do a little activity. I want to ask a couple questions here. I'll stop my share. I know I'm highlighted, but Tamsin, can you actually help take off the highlights so we can just see everybody for a moment? Thank you. I wanted to actually invite people. I know you get stuck in all these meetings and stuff like that, and you'll probably have your video off for most of this presentation. But I wanted to invite people to actually turn their video back on. So I wanted to do just a little interactive activity just to get started. So I wanted to take a moment, invite everybody I know you're there, want to see some faces, want to see who's hanging out at Evergreen these days. Really good to see folks. Awesome, awesome, awesome. First off, my first question is, did anybody actually do the reading? Show of hands. Anybody actually try and read the article? Or Tamsin, did you send it out or anything? All right, a couple people. All right, cool. I realized what I said was kind of heady, but hopefully we can make sense of it as we go through today. But what I did want to do was a little activity from the Center for Story-Based Strategy called Assumption Spectrogram, which is just a nice little way of kind of getting some of the ideas in the group out and seeing what people think. And as we kind of lean into this topic of what is post-capitalist world or post-capitalist politics, I just had a couple of questions. And the way I wanted to do it was like this. I'm going to share a statement, and I'm going to invite you all to think about that statement. And if you agree with the statement, I want to invite you to put your hand up like this and like a thumbs up kind of thing. If you disagree, you can have your thumb down. And if you're somewhere in between, let us know where you're at in between. And so I'm going to read off the statement. You're going to think about it, chew on it, put your hands up, agree, disagree, somewhere in between. And we'd love to just see where we're at as a community. I'm going to give a practice one just so we can try it out. So here I'm going to give you a statement. Cats are better than dogs. Cats are better or cooler than dogs. Agree, disagree, adamantly, somewhere in between. Okay, I see some in betweens. And take a moment to look at the rest of your classmates, because you all might need to argue about this later. Definitely some thumbs up, some in betweens. All right, thank you for jumping in the chat as well. All right, cool, noted. So pretty much you did it right, rocked it. I think it makes sense. I've got another one. Entrepreneurism can save this world. Entrepreneurism can save this planet. Do you agree or disagree? And now let's keep those thumbs up for a minute. So I actually want to ask, I want to call on a couple people if that's okay. And I want you to try and make your case. So I'm just looking around. All right, if it's okay, you had your thumbs up pretty adamant. If you want to make a case about why entrepreneurism can save this planet. It doesn't have to be right, but it can just be your hot take. Awesome, awesome. Yeah, more people, not waiting for these big actors to do stuff and things like that. Okay, great, perfect. Because actually that's what I was going to call on next, was somebody who disagreed. So thank you for sharing that perspective as well. Well, awesome. I honestly, I would love, usually if I'm doing a more legit workshop, we would really dig into some of these things, but it's good to get different perspectives. And, I hope that you all enjoy and chew on these things, because there isn't just one answer, and it's really worth listening to each other and seeing where we're all at in this community. All right, my next one, I'm going to keep us moving. Here's my statement. Capitalism is on its way out. Do you agree or disagree? Where are you at on this one? All right, and again, once you put your hand up, keep it up there for a moment, just so we can kind of look around the group and stuff like that. Where are we at? Cool, cool, cool. All right, I see some hands. Well, thank you for sharing that perspective of, yes, capitalism is on its way out. It might even be forcing itself out with its consumption of resources. All right, anybody disagree? I didn't catch who disagreed. Who was a disagreeing person? Yeah, some people would argue that capitalism is very dynamic, that it confronts these barriers and somehow overcomes them, or has new technological innovations. Everyone was freaking out about peak oil in the 70s, and then something called hydraulic fracturing. A new technology emerged, which allowed us to tap huge oil reserves, even here in the United States, that have continued the fossil fuel industry. One last one, and then I really want to get into my talk and stuff like that, but I'm so curious. My next and last statement is, I'm hopeful about the future. I am hopeful about the future. Do you agree or disagree? I'm looking at the time. I need to keep moving. But otherwise, I'm almost like, dang, I wish I was still at Evergreen. Get to hang out with you all and have good conversations and stuff. All right, let's keep going. I got to change my slide now. Let's see if I can do that. All right. So I was kind of asked to share just a little bit about my own journey, Evergreen. And, you know, like I said, I'm 10 years out. So kind of looking back, I probably have a little bit of like rose colored glasses, or I'm just like, man, my time at Evergreen was awesome. I had a lot of fun. And I'll just say that, you know, I was not a traditional college student. I graduated from high school. I did not go to college. I tried to do 1 year at Western Washington. That sucked. I kind of knew that the kinds of politics and things I was interested in weren't there. So I took more time off. Yeah, so it was 2011, 2014. Evergreen, I feel like, is one of those places that goes through like shifts and seasons and various things. And I just feel like that period when I was there, I don't know, Andy, what you were doing and what other student activities folks were doing, but the student groups were rocking. There were just so many different groups doing things. There was lots of like house shows, house parties. I, for some ridiculous reason, tried to run 2 student groups. I had dug through the archives and learned about something called EPIC, the Evergreen Political Information Center. And I was trying to use that student group to get monies to organizing friends and stuff like that. And I had started a group called Dirty Hands Arts Collective, which was just hanging out, making art. And I think maybe, I don't know if it's still up there, but we passed some kind of policy that let people hang up murals in all the buildings and stuff like that. I don't know if there's still murals and stuff like that, but nonetheless, it was pretty awesome. And one of the key things for me at that time, being in that community, was wanting to help bring everybody together. And so one of the main things that I did while at Evergreen was something called Evergreen Revival, which was just a community space. It was a gathering place for all the different community groups, or sorry, the student groups to get together and share ideas and work on political projects and things like that. And so for me, again, this was just like, I loved Evergreen. Let's see. I wanted to also just briefly acknowledge that there was like the interesting politics that was happening at the time was the Olympia port was actually allowing or importing a little thing called proppants, which are these ceramic beads that are used in the hydraulic fracturing process. So the extraction of oil, they force these materials called proppants into the ground that hold layers of rock apart so they can suck out all the oils and other things like that in the Bakken oil fields out in the Dakotas. And so I think this is Zoltan actually sitting over here on the chair here, talking to us about some of that work. And so this effort with Evergreen Revival of kind of trying to like tap into the historical spirit of Evergreen and inviting people to hang out and like build power together and stuff like that was really fun. And we had the opportunity of like building relationships with our professors along the way. So yeah, I'm just kind of like, it was the golden years. And I wanted to give a shout out to some of my old professors. I think Peter, I'm like, oh man, a lot of these folks are no longer there, but Peter Dorman was this amazing character who was in the global development space and scene. And he really shook my politics. I kind of showed up with kind of a black and white binary perspective. And he really opened me up to kind of see the world as a great unfolding, that so many of today's problems in some ways were yesterday's solutions, and the dynamic tension that exists in our systems. There was Doug Schuler, who also unfortunately is gone, but he ran this kind of like oddball program called it's a mouthful, Civic Intelligence Research and Action Laboratory, which was a creative space and was using this framework of pattern languages, which was a tool used, I think, like in architecture, where they mapped out different shapes and patterns in the built environment, and thinking about that in the context of what Doug called civic intelligence. So there was all kinds of experimentation and play, and really was just a fruitful place to explore things. Also, there was this other person out there. Her name was Jeannie Hahn. She was terrifying, but also probably one of the most rigorous political economy professors out there. Really either passed or failed. But all this to say is that like the period that I was there, the things that were going on, which is really dynamic. And lastly, I got to give a shout out Andy, I didn't know you were going to be on this call, but I have a little note here about Greg Porter, who maybe is still at student activities. I hope so. But anyways, as a student, as somebody who's trying to run student groups, Greg would run over to student activities with these big ideas of how we want to spend all this money. And Greg would turn around and be like, all right, I know you want to create a whole collection of zines and stuff like that. Just do one first. He always had an emphasis on working through stepping stones. You might have a big grand vision, but if you're going to reach that big grand vision, you need to start with a small step. And that's just something I learned a lot about. And for you students who are interested in entrepreneurial activities and things like that, I really do encourage you to check out and engage in the student groups. I feel like that's a really fertile ground where you get to like play and build projects and have a little bit of support and structure. And if you get your ducks lined up in a row, maybe Andy will give you some money so you can actually do something. So I just want to give a big shout out to the student activities space. I don't know what the status is these days. And then lastly, kind of what spurred this conversation and stuff like that is this. One of my last classes that I was taking was with Anne Fischel and John Baldridge, and I think Anne is still around. But people might have seen these classic kind of like iceberg visuals. This is a graphic, or I kind of drew on it a little bit too, but Anne Fischel and John Baldridge introduced me to two feminist economists who wrote as one, and they wrote under the moniker of J.K. Gibson Graham. One of them has passed away in the last few years, so there's just one who remains, but she still writes as both of them. And a lot of their work was about what they called post-capitalist politics. It was an effort to establish a discourse for what comes after capitalism and not just a rejection of it. And yeah, I'm just reading my notes here, but not just a critique that documents it and seeks to resist it, but as a giant monolith and mechanistic machine, but actually take up what kind of politics do we need that allows us to actually transform and find a different kind of action. They were kind of exhausted with just resistance work. And so one of the first things and main things that they did and that I got to learn about in this class was this, that, right now our imaginations are trapped between capitalism or socialism or, quote unquote, even we're something called communism. And for them, going the wrong way. They wanted to, oh my gosh, what's going on? They wanted to actually make visible the abundance of economic relationships that are already at play in the world around us that are alive, that underneath this heady thing that we call capitalism, and even for Gibson and Graham, they try and not use this monolithic term. Underneath what they call wage labor, produce for market, and a capitalist firm dynamics, there are all these other kinds of economic relationships. May that be gift economies, may that be indigenous kinship based economies, may that be local currencies, may that be the care work that holds your family together, may that be the social dynamics that you have in your communal household that you live in right now. But there are all these other economic relationships that are just hidden, that because of our narrow mind and the choice of words that we use and the way that we orient ourselves, they largely go unacknowledged. And so this had a profound impact on me. I'm going to put a pause on this because we're going to come back to it later. But this was kind of my first introduction to some of this framework, and it stuck with me. And I guess I should say a little bit more about this. I have some notes here. So what they wrote is, we are interested in an economic politics that allows us to think creatively and to start here and now to make new economies. We believe that other, more just, ecological, sustainable economies are possible, and that everyday people in everyday places can be a part of thinking and reenacting these economies. And they had a little piece about how words make up our world. And they wrote, how we imagine, frame, and talk about our economy influences how we act. Contemporary economic politics confronts the economy as a bounded object separated from other social processes. This representation informs modes of accounting value and influences how economies are materialized through this practice and organizations. In order to remake the economy, we needed different representations and framing that enable new modes of calculation and materialization. So they really tried to make visible these things. And I'll just read this last little piece. They used a term called capitalocentrism. Some of the stuff is kind of heady, but this term refers to the dominant representation of all economic activities in the terms of, and terms of their relationship to capitalism as the same as, the opposite to, a complement of, or contained within capitalism. Other attempts to destabilize, our attempts to destabilize the hegemony of capitalist centrism have included a number of theoretical strategies. And so their main strategies was to produce a different representation of our economic identity and to develop different narratives of economic development. All right, I'm going to set this to the side because I have to keep going, but we'll come back to it. Just kind of recap in my little journey through Evergreen. I just have a couple tips for you all. In my time at Evergreen, I feel like Evergreen is really good if you kind of have a theory or idea of what you're trying to do and get out of Evergreen. Otherwise, 4 years can fly by really quickly and you can take a lot of different classes. So you may not know exactly what you're trying to do, but it's worth having a hypothesis and trying to pursue something because the school's there to help you do things. The school's totally down and game to let you push and try things out. Another pro tip, of course, is get to know your professors, especially if you're intent on doing an independent learning contract, which I know can sometimes feel like, you're trying to be independent and learn on your own. Why should you build relationships with other people? But for a successful ILC, you're going to want to have some relationship with professors. Other things, I'm always a big fan of checking out the archives if you haven't yet. I think it's down in the basement of the library. It's a pretty wild place. There's a lot of history there, but also a lot of other campus resources, Photoland, other things like that. Like, you all are entrepreneurs, get access to some of these things. There's some really cool, like, learning about the historical roots of the school's pedagogy, very interesting. And also, I'm 10 years out. I've been away from college for 10 years. And like I said, I look back with like rosy glasses. So I just encourage you all to like savor and be in and build community. You're going to find yourself out 10 years out. And you're like, dang, I wished, or I missed those times when I could just like go hang out with some friends and kick it. So I'm like, do it. And then lastly is like journal, write things down. One of the things I looked back when I looked at my notes is just like there was such a fire and aliveness in some of my journal entries and writings at that time. The world is going to try and beat you down a little bit. Take notes. Some of my best ideas and some of my core beliefs were established while in high school and college. And putting those things down on paper will help kind of bring those things to life. So I'm just like, put it down. So yeah, there you go. Some few tips for Evergreen. All right. So for me, I was a lot like some of those folks. When you asked, can entrepreneurship save the planet or not? My hand was down. I was like, I don't think so. I think organizing and social movements is the way to go. So after college, I actually spent a period of time being a direct action trainer and helping normalize direct action as a tactic and technique for building social movements in the Pacific Northwest. And it was an incredible time. 2014 to 2016 was a big movement moment. And I was really fortunate to be part of a core organizing team with huge mobilizations that brought out thousands of people, part of some very fierce and very clear-minded actions in confronting the fossil fuel and climate crisis that we're in right now. In that lower left right corner, you can see Emily and Annette. And I guess I'm just saying is some of the people we're doing direct actions with weren't typical, ragtag anarchists. A lot of these folks were actually like professors. Some of these folks were, lawyers. Some of these folks were parents. It was a really wide range of people who take direct actions. And this last one in the corner is the valve turners. And this is a group of folks who we coordinated an action where all across the US-Canada border, there are 5 major pipelines that allow fossil fuels to flow from Canada to the United States. And in coordinated action, these folks turned off every single one of those across the United States, across the Canada-US border. And so it was just an incredible time to be doing this work. There was a lot going on. It felt like a lot was possible. And it was probably some of the period of time that I felt most spiritually alive to be doing work like so clear-minded with other folks. But also at the same time, after a few years of it, I was realizing that just resisting wasn't enough, that you can't just fight all the time. You also have to build what happens next. And I was beginning to hunger for doing other stuff, for really, and actually let me change my screen here. But I was starting to hunger to do something more than just resist. And so my first foray into entrepreneurship. Um, Again, I took no business classes or things like that. But after doing years of direct action campaigning, I built lots of friends and relationships and realized that, generally a lot of people know that our current culture is both unhealthy and unsustainable. And there's incredible work that's happening. Unfortunately, we just don't do a good job of telling our stories. And so we started Story 2 Designs. And I'm really proud to say that I started with two other Evergreen kids, one of which had taken some business classes. Leo did, but Gabe and I had no freaking experience. Gabe just hung out in the computer lab. And so, yeah, I just want to show you, this was kind of our premise. This was our kind of like, I don't know if we call it a business case or whatever, but this is where we at least got our name, was that belief that we're stuck in between two systems, that maybe one is on its way down right now and another is rising. But how do we make that transition faster? How do we get to that other side? And so for us, kind of coming back to some of the people's thoughts earlier today, that it isn't just us. We can't be sole entrepreneurs and save the planet. There already is good work happening, that we want to support, our social movements. And that's where we decided we want to help tell stories better. And so that's what we did. We spent 5-6 years helping tell stories. And to do that, part of the thing that really helped us is that I got involved with a group called the Center for Story-Based Strategy. Go figure. But these folks really helped provide some of the tools to high-level theoretical narrative frames. And then with our worker cooperative, we got to work with a number of organizations to make things happen. And I'm really proud about that. It's pretty incredible to step back and look and be like, wow, we actually did some things. We actually helped a lot of different folks. And, I didn't quite realize it at that time, but some of that early stuff that I had been introduced to around Gibson Graham and how language is powerful, the importance of reframing things, to work with all these different organizations. One of the core things that we did was help them look at the narratives around them and identify what are the underlying beliefs that are stuck in the current, either your opposition or the status quo. What is that narrative that is there that gets in the way of you doing your work? And what are the values and beliefs that we need to uplift to give you agency? And that was a lot of our work. And so before kind of connecting the dots fully to some of the theory from Gibson and Graham, that was some of the work that we were doing here. I'm just taking a moment to look at my notes to make sure I'm not missing anything. Yeah, and it was a worker cooperative. That was a really cool thing for us. I think for me, being a political economy kid, I wanted to try and put some of the theory and to play in practice, and not being perfect, being like, all right, let's just put our hands in the ground and learn more about how capitalism works. Let's start a small firm and see what happens. And in doing so, I gotta say, it's interesting. It's not easy. When you think about who you are now and our vision for who we want to be, there's usually a gap. And usually there's a set of muscles that you need to build that you don't have yet. That it's important to give yourself permission to play, practice, and perform these things as you merge in those directions. And I'll share this later on, but giving ourselves permission to like fuck up and make mistakes and check in with each other and have like incomplete ideas, or I don't know, there's something about that. Like not all of us share the same politics, like a number of our members, and I wish I had a photo of all of us, but a number of our members, and I'll move us just to the next slide. A number of our members didn't actually like have a strong politics. They just were tired of working for the man kind of thing. But that opportunity of starting a cooperative was really powerful. And at the same time, a worker cooperative is still a small business. I have to hold that up for you all. When you have 7 people who are part of your cooperative and trying to live in the Seattle area and trying making a living wage, that's $45,000 you have to figure out where to come up every single month. You still have to feed that darn beast to keep those doors open. And for us, trying to support grassroots organizations across, both locally and across the country, that's hard. Our community, our audience that we're trying to serve, don't have a lot of money, are usually really, really busy, and also more likely don't even have a dedicated communications person. And so for us to try and help tell stories and build websites and do design and stuff like that while making a living was really difficult. But I will say that those constraints really challenged us to think creatively about how we can serve our community. And one of the things that I'm most proud of that we innovated on was we tried to do something a little ridiculous, but we tried to build websites in one day for these communities to be able to like, I'm kind of getting the nuts and bolts here, but we could charge somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000 to build a website in one day. And that was kind of like a framework where we can meet these grassroots communities where they're at and also eke out a living wage. Other lessons learned was just around design thinking and being process oriented. I won't bore you all about that kind of stuff, but I do think that was a big turning point for me. And I'm sure you all probably geek out on some of this stuff, but I really encourage folks to learn about design thinking and how to move ourselves to being process oriented. Especially as a worker cooperative, we had a little saying that was, let's manage the process so we don't have to manage each other. If we had a really clear process of how our operations work, everyone knew what their role was, and we didn't have to have one of us breathing down the other person's neck, kind of thing. And that was a big turning point for us as we grew our cooperative from 2 people, me and Gabe, to 7 people. Also, another big one, early learning lesson. And again, I don't know if they teach us that at the business school and stuff like that, but things take a lot of freaking work. And when you're feeling stuck, when you're feeling lost, when you're feeling like, oh, this isn't going to work out, you need to orient yourself. When you're feeling those kinds of things, you're feeling overwhelmed, it's an invitation to ask for help. And that's something that we'll come back to later on, but when you're doing good work, people are there to help. And so I really encourage people, you know, especially speaking for myself as a dude, you can usually get into a thing of I'm going to do it myself, but really don't go alone, ask for help. Other just last 2 things, you always, this is something important, you always make a better decision when there's more than one thing to choose from. Please give yourself options. You'll always make a better decision. And then lastly, look for unseen thirds between the binary. That was really helpful for our business because sometimes we would get stuck. It's like either we could do this or we could do that. But if you give yourself permission just to sit and settle and get past the anxiousness, there might be a delightful unseen third or a way to approach something that you hadn't initially seen. I'm trying to see if there's anything else. Yeah, I think for me, at the end of the day, having started Story 2 Designs, at a certain point, I kind of, once it became clear, oh my gosh, we're just running a small business, there was part of me who still had its heart in social transformation, still had my heart in movement building. And I was like, all right, one of the other limitations is that there's only one me. And at the end of the day, I can only provide so much support and value to these communities based on how much time I have in the day. And I was getting really excited about that possibility of doing something that could actually scale. So next. All right, so enter Community Gearbox. It's very much an experiment. It's still very much in its ugly duckling phase. It has a long ways to go. But I guess I'll just say really briefly what Community Gearbox is a community inventory management platform. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but the idea is that it's an app that lets both users and organizations share, co-own, and mobilize resources amongst people that they know and trust. And it was really, really inspired by the work of Gibson and Graham and some of the theoretical stuff that I learned at college. It was kind of a way for me to come back to my political economy kid roots and think about how can I put some of these theoretical things into play and into practice. And I'm keeping an eye on the time, so I'm gonna move a little bit. I'll keep us moving here. So I'm gonna probably just skip this slide, but this is just one of the trends that we saw, you know, that there's a general sentiment in the larger ecosystem of people that are, even this is, I think, a Gallup poll, but it's just showing the erosion of millennial and Gen Z's interest in capitalism. And I think that there's a possibility here. I think that part of this started to reaffirm that we need to build some infrastructure that allows people to live into an alternative economic relationships. And so kind of going back to that iceberg picture, At the top, you have like the visible part of tech capitalism. And part of our hypothesis at Community Gearbox is that there's an existence of and the possibility for many different economic relationships if we use some of this infrastructure. The question is, who's going to build it? So revisiting Gibson and Graham, just a little quote from them. The community economy is an acknowledged space of social interdependency and self-formation. Anything but a blueprint is an unmapped and uncertain terrain that calls for exploratory conversation. And I really hold on to that because, again, what I'm trying to do with Community Gearbox, I'm not sure, it's uncertain, but I want to try and I want to put some energy and weight behind it to see what could happen. And so one of the frameworks that they have for post-capitalist politics is a new politics of the subject or how people identify, a new politics of language, and a new politics of how collective action can work. And so using that framework, here's what we try to explore. Within the capitalist framework, you have main subjects of the employee, the business owner, the consumer, the property owner, and the investor. And for us, it was like, one of the things I learned at narrative strategy with the Center for Story-Based Strategies, you can't do it all. Find one place to intervene. And so for us, it was like, all right, let's see if we can change people's relationship as a consumer, which is right now really based around individual consumption. Can we shift to that? Next was the politics of language. Right now, a lot of us as consumers are used to purchasing things, maybe renting things, maybe even borrowing and lending things. Can we build more new language on some of those things, like co-ownership? One of the terms I've been playing with is like, I know it's not right, but co-parenting, instead of lending and borrowing stuff, can you co-parent something amongst people or groups of friends? It kind of imbues a sense of relationship or care of the things that we have and share amongst each other. And also a politics of collective action. Can we actually create collective abundance? Can we bring these things together in a way? There's already so much shit in this world. And so for us, one of our big things is, what if we start with trust? Just because there's already been a lot of projects out there that try and convince you to share things with random people across the city, with somebody that you don't know. And I grew up, part of my time I grew up was on Bainbridge Island, where Buy Nothing's from. Freaking love Buy Nothing. And also at the same time, I've definitely seen those communities mature a little bit, but a lot of things that get shared on Buy Nothing, and even little free lending libraries and things like that, are things that people no longer want. And so they're trying to get rid of, they're like, well, I don't want this couch anymore, let's throw it on Buy Nothing. Well, what happens if we turn this infrastructure for a sharing economy amongst people who actually have a degree of trust and relationship? And the value of things that we're actually pulling with each other increase. And so that's what we're trying to explore, is kind of a stepping stone. That sure, in a utopic world, everything is pooled and co-owned, but we have to start somewhere. And then we have to build those muscles from something. And so that's what we're interested in, is this place amongst people who know and trust each other. I just threw in a screenshot of our darn homepage. If you hadn't seen it yet, I'm going to keep clicking just to be mindful of time. And I just want to share just briefly like what we've been able to accomplish so far on this journey. Again, I'm self-taught. I have not gone to school for any of this kind of stuff. I really believe putting my hands in the dirt and asking for help is a really powerful way of moving forward in the world. But at the beginning of this year, we invited 70 people to jump on a private alpha. They dumped in over like 30K worth of stuff. It was very interesting to see things from adventure vans. I had a co-founder at one point. He left. We had a hypothesis that, outdoor communities would be a place to start, just because there's a lot of gear and stuff like that that you need to get outdoors. And also it's a fairly social activity. So right away, one of the first folks to actually sign a letter of intent to work with us as an organization was Disaster Preparedness and Climate Resiliency Group that represents 6,000 households. They're like, holy smokes, if you could help us actually assess various resources and assets in our community, because we're doing it by pen and paper right now. If you can help us do that across our 30 different neighborhoods, that would be incredible. And even better yet, if you could help us then move and mobilize resources after a disaster hits. If we can move generators from one neighborhood to another that doesn't have power, that would be really meaningful for us. And so I kind of share that a little bit because I'm trying to embrace that same thing of like ugly duckling steps or like things being imperfect and listening to people, because that I had dreamed and hoped that maybe we could support in that way, but getting that affirmation from this group of like, yes, let's work together and push things was really exciting. Later on, we opened it and had 300 people jump on, and we quickly hit the limit of I was working very iteratively. I'm not a hard developer. I was using a no-code tool to prototype, quickly hit the limit on that. And so right now we're in the process of completely retooling it and moving it over to a different platform. Yeah, but I want to be mindful of time. I want to give some space for questions and conversations and stuff like that. But just appreciate you all for letting me hang out, share a little bit of my story. Hopefully there are some nuggets or things in here that are of interest. I myself I'm trying to hold it up here. If it's an experiment, I'm definitely in that uncomfortable space of being somebody who's deep in social movements, but also realizing that if someone who's going to build this infrastructure, someone has to, and has to start from somewhere. In my dream, in my mind's eye, it would be so much more radical and cool, but I'm trying to meet that in between space of the system dynamics too, of like, how can we build something that can actually scale and be adopted widely? And to do that, I actually have to start small and have to start somewhere first. So that's where our energy is going, is towards disaster prep and outdoor organizations first. All right, I'm gonna end this. In summary, I have one last little thing. Yeah, I'll read what I wrote here. It's like, as we look beyond to transform capitalism, we need more space to play, to practice, to perform in different ways. With this project, I'm wanting to create that space that allows people to do exactly that, to build infrastructure, to make visible, to make viable other economic relationships that are not individualist and market-based. Clearly, Community Gearbox is not the solution, but as Greg Porter always emphasized, I hope it can be a stepping stone to give people an experience of the direction that we might be able to go. And for you all, I want to invite you all to hold more paradox in your life, to know that incredible things are possible, but to realize that things take time and hard work, that it's important to ask for help, especially when you feel stuck, hurt, lost, and then to realize that that's a signal to ask for help, to be process oriented, to journal and write things down, to invite and welcome difference, different perspective, different skills. It's one of the core practices of Evergreen to unify what may initially look like disparate things, to look for unlikely allies, to get clear on your why, be iterative, embrace the ugly duckling work, take all that tactical feedback and small things from people, but also keep your eye on a big vision and don't let others move you from that. Because if you're doing good work, the world wants you to succeed. All right, thanks y'all.
Thank you so much, Dante. This was incredible. I really appreciate it. I think at this point, well, actually first, yes, can we get thanks and cheers and claps and snaps and all the above for this session. I want to open the floor, just checking the chat. So Dante, there's a question. What do you think of when you hear the word bioregional?
Yeah, that's a good question. What was that? Cascadia was really popular. I don't know what happened to Cascadia these days, but I think it's definitely a way of like place-based politics and orienting ourselves around the natural regions. I'm not necessarily the best person to speak to bioregionalism. I'm very intrigued by it. One of the things that I've become really interested in the last few years is just my relationship to my local geography and learning about watersheds. But I'm here in San Francisco, which is a new place for me, and I'm not sure about some of the bioregional work that's happening. It's more of just a personal practice of getting in water and learning about the local ecosystem.
Awesome, thank you. We've got another question, a couple of questions coming in. What was your most effective strategy for positive community involvement?
Yeah, at Evergreen, it was just making up excuses to get together, of like either having like dinner with folks or whatever. We used to throw really epic like house parties, and the best house parties always had like bands from like different scenes or different parts of the community. And so not just throwing a house party that only had rappers or hip hop artists, but also like rock bands and stuff like that, like creating cross-pollination. was always a fun thing to do, and it really brought a lot of the community together.
I'll send it to you. There's a lot of stuff in the chat, but one of our students just going back to your bioregional question, talked or mentioned Hilo in San Francisco as a resource.
Yep, I'm familiar with those folks. I've got an account on Hilo. Very awesome.
Awesome. Any other questions?
Curious.
Awesome. Well, I think I'm going to, let me see. Are you using graph data structure for connecting links like Foam or Obsidian?
Ooh, wow. I'm not sure. I'm moving the platform to a tool called, so many different names. It's called Flutterflow, which uses both Flutter and Dart, and then Firebase as the database. I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with Graph. But I know that Firebase is a non-SQL.
Awesome. Well, I want to respect everyone's time here. So Dante, if you can stay with us for a couple of minutes, I just want to again give a big thank you to you for joining us today and also allowing us to open your session out to the greater Evergreen community. So thank you so much. So I'm going to ask folks who are not in my class and Kathleen's class I'm going to bid you adieu and wish you a happy weekend. And then we'll keep going in our classes. Thank you all.